Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joseph Kent, and I am the Director of Education for the National Atomic Testing Museum. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This is actually Victory Over Japan Day, so 75th anniversary of that, and that's part of the reason why we're having one of our distinguished lecturers today. We're really excited to have Chris McDougal from the National Museum of the Pacific War here to speak about the Operation Magic Carpet, which is a lesser known operation following World War II. Kind of gets forgotten about. So Chris will be talking about that operation, and then we'll follow up with another piece, and then we'll open up to questions. So first, I'd love to introduce Mr. McDougal. He's a student of the Pacific War for more than 3 decades. Chris McDougal earned a BS in history from the University of Hawaii and completed a Master of Library Science at the University of North Texas. He has been with the National Museum of the Pacific War since 2015 and became Director of Archives and Library at the museum in January 2020. In his current position, Mr. McDougal oversees an archive that preserves more than 1,000 linear feet of documents, publications, photographs, and recordings contributed by Pacific War veterans and their families from over the past 50 years, as well as the research material gathered by several highly regarded World War II historians. So we are excited to have Mr. McDougal here today, and I will pass it over to him. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Hello, everyone. First, it's a great honor for me to be participating in this program sponsored by the National Atomic Testing Museum. To be doing so on behalf of the National Museum of the Pacific War on the 75th anniversary of the surrender signing on USS Missouri adds even more honor to the occasion. As World War II came to a close, getting members of the U.S. Armed Forces home from overseas became a top priority. That effort was immense in scale and, as I will share, covered more than what might normally be assumed. Back to the beginning here. Sorry about this. The interrelated subjects that I will be discussing today are the close of World War II, magic carpet planning, magic carpet in the ETO, magic carpet in the PTO, homecoming, and I will conclude with an addendum. During February 1945, at the Yalta Conference, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt agreed that they should meet again after the surrender of Germany to determine what post-war Europe would look like. Germany surrendered the following May, so a decision was made to meet the following July at Potsdam, Germany. A primary reason to meet was to discuss the defeat of Japan. During the lead up to this conference, it was thought that the entry of a neutral Russia into the fight and a planned US invasion of Japan would be the most likely way to end the war. Leading up to the conference, President Truman did not have a lot of faith in the atomic bomb. That changed the day before the conference began with the success of the Trinity test. With the results of Trinity known to Truman, that must have felt like he did not need to depend on Russia to help end the war. And when the Potsdam Declaration was made on 26 July, it stated that only unconditional surrender would be accepted from Japan. Development of a planned invasion of Japan's home islands began in early 1945 by the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the overarching code name of Operation Downfall was given to it. The first part was called Operation Olympic, and was scheduled to begin around the beginning of November 1945 at the home island of Kyushu. The second part was called Operation Coronet, and it was estimated to begin at the beginning of March 1946 and would take place on the home island of Honshu. It is hard to comprehend the figures for downfall. More than 750,000 US servicemen were expected to be devoted to Olympic on the ground, and more than 1 million were to be devoted to Coronet. 14 divisions were to land at Kyushu, and 25 were to take part in the campaign at Honshu. In preparation for Operation Olympic, during the middle of 1945, the US and British navies encircled and punished the home islands at will. That effort was combined with missions flown over targets in Japan by carrier-based aircraft and B-29s from the Marianas. Then, 3 major events during the first 9 days of August helped hasten the end of World War II. First, the atomic bomb was dropped by the US over Hiroshima. Then Russia, who had been neutral in the fight against Japan, declared war and attacked Manchukuo, Japan's puppet state in China. The following day, a second atomic bomb was dropped by the US over Nagasaki. Ultimately, after those 3 events, Emperor of Japan Hirohito decided that surrender was the best option for his country. The US military experienced a phenomenal growth during World War II. As of 1939, there were 334,000 service members. In 1945, there were more than 12 million men and women spread throughout all branches of service. By the time of the Japanese surrender, 8 million of them were at various locations throughout Europe, the Pacific, and Asia. During the middle of 1943, Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall requested the formation of committees that would develop plans to return service members home when the war ended. One of the most important, and many would say the only important, aspect of such a plan was creating a means to prioritize the order in which service members would return home from overseas. As a consequence, the Advanced Service Rating Score, ASRS, was developed. Each military branch implemented a variation of this plan. The one utilized by the Army is most commonly referenced, and that is the representative version I will speak about. The ASRS was initially issued in September 1944, and there were 2 revisions in early 1945. The system was simple on the surface. Service members who had been in the longest and been overseas the greatest amount of time would exit first. There were 4 categories in the plan, but the point system within those categories is the main thing to know. Enlisted needed a total of 85 points to be considered for discharge. Each month of service equaled 1 point. Each month of service overseas equaled an additional point. Combat awards, including medals and battle stars, equaled 5 points each. Service members with children under the age of 18 would get 12 points. Officers were assessed a little differently. Before the surrender of Japan, those who might be needed for the expected invasion of the home islands were not only assessed based on their ASRS, but on military specialty and efficiency as well. After the Japanese surrender, the qualifying number was reduced to 80 points. Because of the brain drain among those expected to manage and carry out the post-war peace and the demand in general for an adjustment, the required points were changed in December 1945. Officers needed 70 points plus 4 years of service. Women's Army Corps officers needed 37 points. Enlisted needed 50 points plus 4 years of service. Enlisted women needed 32 points. Most of those who qualified under this system were then faced with getting home to the US by ship. The War Shipping Administration oversaw this effort, called Operation Magic Carpet, first in the ETO and then later in the PTO. When war ended in the ETO during May 1945, the U.S. Navy was preoccupied in the Pacific Theater and could not assist with the initial phase of Operation Magic Carpet. The Army and Merchant Marine were called upon to begin the process with 300 Liberty and Victory ships that were converted for the job. At its peak during the next 14 months, Magic Carpet would transport 435,000 individuals per month across the Atlantic Ocean to the US. Eventually, with the war in the Pacific over, the Navy was able to commit to helping with Magic Carpet in that effort. The newly commissioned aircraft carrier USS Lake Champlain was one of the ships committed. It could carry 3,300 servicemen at a time and set a record that stood for a decade by making a round trip in under 5 days. Regarding the images you see here, they are from the museum archives. At left, you see the arrival of engineers from the 85th Infantry Division at Newport News, Virginia, during August 1945. The image at right shows the cover of an information booklet handed out to Magic Carpet passengers on USS Randolph, which saw extensive use in the Pacific Theater during the last year of the war. That ship was one of the ships mentioned previously that were sent from the Pacific to help expedite Magic Carpet service during the last few months of 1945. With the Pacific War concluded, the Navy was able to shift its effort to Magic Carpet, and a variety of ships were put into use. Cruisers, destroyers, hospital ships, battleships, LSTs, all were utilized, and nooks and crannies wherever possible were found on them to string hammocks. Aircraft carriers were especially useful because they could be used to transport at least 3,000 at a time. Regarding the images you see here, again, these are all from our museum archives. The photo at left shows USS CF Hughes during a return from Yokohama, Japan at the end of its final Magic Carpet use. The middle photo shows servicemen on USS Land as it arrived in San Francisco at the end of its first of 5 Magic Carpet trips. The photo at right shows servicemen on the flight deck of USS Saratoga as she arrived stateside at the end of her first Magic Carpet trip in August 1945. Saratoga would later be used as one of the Operation Crossroads ships. That leads me to speak about one of the great strengths of the archives at the National Museum of the Pacific War, which is our collection of firsthand accounts of the war. Veterans have provided us with oral histories, memoirs, symposium testimonials, original diaries, and original letters. It is a very rich amount of material accumulated over the past 50 years that provide primarily the enlisted point of view. One such oral history was recorded for the museum in 2003. It was with Frank McGuinn, who served on Saratoga during both Magic Carpet and Crossroads. Mr. McGuinn said that Saratoga brought back almost 30,000 people during Magic Carpet until we were given orders to go to Bikini, where we were to participate in the atom bomb tests. As a witness to the ship's demise, he said, "That may have been the saddest day of my life up until that time, seeing our ship go down." The images here introduce another aspect of Magic Carpet that is not spoken much about. Due to intense political pressure in late 1945, the War Brides Act was passed by the US Congress. As a result, approximately 250,000 women from other parts of the globe who married American military personnel during the war were able to cut through red tape that had been preventing them from entering the US. These photos, also from our archives, show the arrival of SS Mariposa in California during 1946 as a part of the Magic Carpet offshoot called Operation War Bride. At the time, the ship was carrying more than 800 brides and military dependents from Australia in order to reunite families. Another selection from our oral history collection gives some idea about what it was like to arrive in the US on one of these war bride journeys. Alma Anning, a British citizen, met Chester Lightkey, an American serving in the Army Air Force in Oxford, England during 1944. They wed in February 1945, and after the war, Chester was sent back home. After the War Brides Act was enacted, Alma followed 6 months later aboard USAT Bridgeport, which had been converted specifically to bring war brides and military dependents back to the US. During the interview for the National Museum of the Pacific War, she stated that they gave us wonderful food on board. Compared to what we had in England, it was terrific. They gave us chocolate ice cream. I ate so much chocolate ice cream that I didn't want any more when I got to America. The final subject I would like to speak about are the last to return from the war. Those who made the supreme sacrifice and were interred overseas where they died. The remains of many of these individuals were exhumed and returned to the US for reinterment at the request of family. This final homecoming began in large scale during late 1947. This photograph is from our archives and documents the first ship to arrive at the US with war dead since the end of the war. The ship was the USAT Honda Knot, and it is shown entering San Francisco Bay on 10 October 1947. Honda Knot held the bodies of 3,208 service members that day, and approximately 2 weeks later, another 6,200 bodies arrived from military cemeteries in Europe on USS Joseph V. Connolly at New York Harbor. Hundreds of people were on hand at each arrival to pay their respects. These special homecomings continued sporadically for at least the following 2 years. With that, I conclude my segment of today's special webinar.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing the story of Operation Magic Carpet with us. And I'm actually going to add a part of that, add to that as well. As you mentioned in your presentation, a lot of these ships were actually then used for Operation Crossroads. And I'm actually going to bring up a slide of my own real quick. Chris, could you unshare your screen, please? Thank you very much. Here we are. So, this, everybody hear me okay? This is a little PowerPoint I put together for Operation Crossroads and post-war testing. And as you mentioned, a lot of the ships are actually used in Operation Crossroads. And though most people know that atomic bombs were used to end World War II, not everyone is aware that nuclear testing resumed among the idyllic islands of the Pacific and continued in the desert of southern Nevada. The first post-war series of nuclear tests, Operation Crossroads, Chris mentioned, was conducted in the summer of 1946 near Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Now, Crossroads involved the detonation of 2 Fat Man-style nuclear weapons on a fleet of old but very historic surplus ships, including, as I said, some that were included or involved in Operation Magic Carpet, such as the USS Saratoga, the Independence, ships of that nature. So some of these legendary ships were actually involved. Others included the USS Nevada. So a lot of these big names of in terms of ships during World War II were involved. Now, Crossroads, following Crossroads, August 1st, 1946, President Truman confirmed the civilian control of atomic energy by signing into existence the Atomic Energy Commission, who led testing for the next couple decades. Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. carried out 105 nuclear tests in the Pacific Proving Grounds. Now, we turn to the Nevada Test Site, which is what we talk about primarily here at the National Atomic Test Museum. President Truman approved the creation of the Nevada Test Site in 1950. Land within the confines of the U.S. Air Force's Las Vegas Bombing and Gunnery Range was selected as a result of a study called Project Nutmeg. Originally called the Nevada Proving Grounds, it was established as the primary continental testing site as concerns grew about the costs and security of testing in the Pacific. You just had the Korean War start up prior. A lot of concerns about testing in the Pacific at that time. You also had the Russians begin testing in 1949. Now, the NTS, now known as Nevada National Security Site, is located 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas. From 1951 to 1992, the site grew from 680 square miles to 1,375 square miles and was home to 100 above ground and 828 underground nuclear tests. So you could see how going from Magic Carpet, a lot of these ships were pretty much tapped right away to be involved in Operation Crossroads. And that was the first of the post-war tests. So there is a lot of overlap between the National Museum of the Pacific War and the National Atomic Testing Museum. Where their story ends, ours really begins. So yeah, it's wonderful to have you here, Chris. I think we'll open up for questions about your presentation, anything about the war, about Magic Carpet, or anything that you're doing at the museum. I think that would be also very interesting to people, looking for resources online especially. So let's open up for some questions. I'll go ahead and stop my share here. So do we have any questions? Let me check here. Okay, any questions for Chris? You can do that in the chat feature or the Q&A portion. I do have a question for you, Chris, as I kind of alluded to. What kind of resources do you have online that people can access, considering we are, dealing with a lot of issues with the COVID pandemic, people working from home, students,
Right.
schooling virtually. So what kind of resources are available on your website?
Well, probably the main resource that a lot of people would know about, maybe not, but it's one of the most used probably, is our collection of oral histories. The 2 segments that I provided there in the presentation, both of those are available online in our digital repository. The digital repository that we have contains over 2,000, about 2,500 digitized oral history recordings that volunteers for the museum have made over the last, about 30 years. It's a great collection. It's only about half of what we really have. The rest are in the process of being put online at some point in the future. They can also access documents and photos from our archives there. Quite a few of those are Admiral Nimitz, but we also have quite a few photographs from wartime photographers that were throughout the Pacific during the war. Those would be the majority of the materials, but if people don't find what they are looking for there, they're always we are always here to hear from them. They can reach out to me. They can reach out to the digital archivist. They can reach out to our curators and see if we have something. We have a lot of material. We've been collecting material from veterans and their family members for almost 5 decades. So we have a lot of resources. All they have to do is call us or email us.
Thank you, Chris. Was there anything surprising as you were working on the presentation about Operation Magic Carpet? Was there anything that you learned as you were working on the presentation, or anything like you'd like to add that really didn't fit on one of the PowerPoints or didn't really fit with your presentation?
Well, I know that some of the material that I came across indicated that some ships were actually segregated. They separated African Americans from Caucasian travelers, but most of the images that I've come across have actually showed just the opposite. The vast majority have a combination of people of color and white people in them. So that was an issue I kind of wanted to explore a little bit, but I didn't know that I would have enough time.
Thank you, Chris. That's actually very interesting to hear. Not wholly surprising, but certainly very interesting to hear that even as they were returning, it was still something that was very much continued.
Right.
Now, we do have a question here in the chat. Were there any collaborations between the U.S. Navy Atlantic with the U.S. Navy Pacific, assuming the European theater military personnel return sooner, on how best to return soldiers, Marines, and sailors home? So, there were any collaboration between the two arms of it?
Until the Pacific War concluded, not so much. The U.S. Navy was pretty much tied up in the Pacific right up to the end of the war. And but as soon as the peace was signed, they cooperated as much as possible.
Thank you. We have anybody in chat here participating? Any questions for Chris? Is there anything that you have coming up for at the museum that you'd like to talk about? And is there any upcoming exhibit that people can expect to see if they come and visit?
Well, one thing I would definitely like to point out is our annual symposium that's coming up. The museum has been conducting symposiums with distinguished presenters and veterans for a long time now, several decades. Matter of fact, that's where the oral history program kind of took off. And our new one is coming, and it's Home Alive in 45. So be looking for that. That's coming up next month.
Well, I'm sure we all look forward to that. Is there going to be any virtual component to it?
It's going to be all virtual.
Oh, good. Okay. That's what I had thought, but I wanted to make sure that if people are interested who may not be from that area, will be able to
Yeah.
get to that. That's good. A couple questions we have in our Q&A. Do you have any information on the planning to move European units to the Pacific if the war had continued? Oh, I think that's a similar question that we had asked. Now, some of the images show a lot of people on the flight decks of aircraft carriers. Did everyone get a bunk, or did they have people sleeping outside in the interest of moving as many servicemen as possible? How jammed were they?
Their bunks were on the flight decks. I'm sure there may have been some up on the deck, but I think they did have most of the accommodations below deck.
Okay, perfect. Do we have any more questions? I want to share we'll. Oh, here we go. Here's one question. This person was surprised with the number of war brides since they knew a few. Was the number 250000 from the Pacific only, or both theaters?
All theaters combined, it was 250,000.
I just realized that was a larger number than I was just reading a serial code barcode. So that's a great question. Yeah, that's interesting. Absolutely. So we'll have a couple more if anybody has any questions. Is there anything you would like to add about the National Museum of the Pacific War? Anything else that you'd like to mention?
I just want to make sure that everybody knows we're open 5 days a week at this time. And even those who are familiar with our campus are aware of our Pacific Combat Zone area where they have reenactments. The reenactments aren't going on, but the combat zone is open. And come check us out.
Have your hours changed any? Is everything updated on your website in terms of knowing what hours and days of the week? Have that been impacted at all?
Yes, everything's updated and current, and it's same hours as normal, just fewer days.
Perfect. And I've been to the museum, and it's a fantastic place to visit.
Thank you.
Wealth of information, amazing exhibits. So it is definitely worth a visit.
It is.
Here's a great one. What are your aviation artifacts on display? This person has not visited the museum for over 15 years. So can you speak about any of the more recent acquisitions?
We are receiving items weekly here. We've got a lot of unique items that have not been displayed before. And we're seriously considering our changing our exhibits here in the Bush Galleries. So that will change in the future. A lot of interesting photos, a lot of never before seen documents, letters, just a whole variety of things. I can't even pick out one particular one. They come in weekly.
Thank you. Now, just to confirm about the symposium before we end, it's going to be on September 18th and 19th. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's going to be that? Okay, fantastic. I always like to ask this question. We have somebody from another museum who is, part of our Distinguished Lecturer series. Do you have any particular favorite artifacts that are part of the collection, either on display or in collections right now? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind that you have a special affinity for?
Oh gosh. For me, I like the real personal commentary that I see on occasion. Some of the diaries and letters, especially here lately, doing research for different projects related to the end of the war, including this one. I've come across some really heartfelt letters that talk about coming home, or thinking about the end of the war, or anticipating having to invade Japan. Those are what really affect me the most, and stay with me the longest, I think.
That's great to hear. We're very similar with our museum as well, because it's you can see all of like the weapons and the gear, but it's really what people connect with, both visitors and people who work with the items, the artifacts themselves. It's really the diaries and the notes and the handwritten correspondences that really stick out in your mind and really connect you to the history, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I think we have another comment or question. Um, no, I think I missed it. So, well, fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and giving this wonderful presentation about Operation Magic Carpet. We appreciate having you as part of our distinguished lecture series. Everyone, thank you for joining us, and it helped commemorate the end of the war, and victory over Japan Day. So this is really great to have all of you. I know it's in the afternoon for some of you, might still be at work. So thank you for taking the time to be here. This will be available on our YouTube channel. So it'll probably be uploaded by next Tuesday. We'll usually send out a post about that. So look for it on our Facebook and Twitter. And so you can always go back and watch Chris's presentation. Thank you again. You all have a wonderful rest of your day, and stay safe out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.